would apply a similar analysis to all of Earth's creatures, from microorganisms to prairie dogs, and most importantly, human beings. The new science aimed to reveal the biological roots of all forms of human organization. The idea was controversial, to say the least. Two of Wilson's fellow biologists at Harvard University, Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Lewontin, told the New York Times that sociobiology would justify the prejudices and inequalities of our society in the way the Nazis had justified the Holocaust with eugenics. Perhaps then it's no surprise that when Wilson took the podium, an anti-racist protester burst forth and doused him with a pitcher of ice water. Sociobiology never took hold, but in a way, Wilson has been vindicated. Many of sociobiology's aims were taken up in a new field that emerged a decade later, evolutionary psychology. Like sociobiology, evolutionary psychology proposes to make sense of all behavior in biological terms. According to the young discipline, anything human can only be truly understood in the light of evolution. The field has made progress in suggesting biological roots for family bonding and for our fears of snakes, spiders, strangers, and heights. But science's ability to demonstrably track behavior to specific genes is modest. Essentially, we can do it with fruit flies in a lab. Still, evolutionary psychologists have published a whole bunch of papers with ambitious claims, such as purporting to have identified the biological factors of why women supposedly love to shop, why certain paintings attract viewers, and more seriously, why rape persists in contemporary society. These papers make for great clickbait, but they seldom come with genetic evidence and rarely withstand scrutiny or cross-cultural comparisons. The extremes of the field make even more far-reaching claims. They argue that human behavior is nothing but predetermined physical reactions to stimuli, and that consequently, independence of thought and a sense of individuality are false. All morals and values are screens for survival instincts. But it's unfair to lay this dire vision solely at the feet of evolutionary psychologists. Darwin himself wondered whether our evolved nature meant that our minds were fundamentally untrustworthy. Fortunately, as we'll see in our final blinks, evolution does not require such a grim view. Blink 5 of 8. The human brain, for all its flaws and exceptional power, is a product of evolution. Before moving on, let's review a bit of what we've covered so far. First, humans are a part of, not apart from, evolution. No other origin story has empirical evidence that can hold a candle to the explanatory power of evolution through natural selection. But this truth came with a cost. We've lost the confidence once given by our creation myths. To compensate, we may be tempted to rearrange evolution to put ourselves at the top, but the science doesn't allow it. On the other hand, looking to evolution to explain everything about humanity has its own pitfalls. It's worth pausing further and noting that we, imperfect as we are, figured all of this out. We're the creatures of evolution who discovered evolution. Or as astronomer Carl Sagan once said, we are a part of the cosmos grown to know itself. What's more, we're here, right now, reasoning through the implications of the discovery of our own origin. This level of cognition is without peer among any animal. We're truly exceptional organisms, and we have evolution to thank for it. But how did it happen? Why would a process attuned to the rigors of survival produce minds that can, for example, handle differential calculus? What evolutionary purpose, as Alfred Russel Wallace wondered, is served by composing a symphony? Well, do you remember that geological flash millions of years ago in which our brains tripled in size? Becoming smarter helped us survive, and as our raw intelligence increased, so did our capacity for speech, cooperation, and abstract thought. At some point, the largeness of our brains allowed neurons to link in new patterns, specifically in the regions associated with memory retrieval, judgment, and self-awareness. The neurons in these areas became free in a way they couldn't within a smaller, more rigid brain. They uncoupled from the needs of survival and became, to use a term we learned earlier, spandrels. Just as architectural spandrels become features of beauty apart from their structural importance, the evolution of our minds went beyond survival to give us our unparalleled linguistic ability, exceptional imagination, and powers of reason. None of this is to say that the brain is without flaws. Our brains are prone to cognitive error, swayed by simple drugs, and easily duped by illusions. Yet, we're the ones investigating these weaknesses. We're the cognitive scientists mapping the biases, the chemists altering perception, and the illusionists performing the trick. What other animal can claim such powers? Blink 6 of 8. Evolution doesn't explain away the individual experience of life. Consciousness. It's a problem. When, for example, does it begin? When does a bit of information, say a mosquito in your periphery, go from your subliminal awareness to your conscious awareness? What threshold must the stuff of the world cross to make it into your consciousness? That full sensory movie you experience as life. French neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene has attempted to crack this problem by flashing numbers at volunteers in brain imaging machines. He observed that an image held for 50 milliseconds goes from a blip in the visual cortex into a tumult of electricity throughout the brain, indicating that at that instant, the image has become conscious experience. Dehaene's milliseconds wouldn't satisfy the celebrated American philosopher Thomas Nagel. For Nagel, consciousness is so essentially subjective that science will never crack the true nature of it. Physics, he famously asserted, can tell us nothing of what it feels like to be a bat. For Nagel and other philosophers, this gap in the scientific account of how the stuff of the world becomes consciousness is a fatal flaw in the evolutionary conception of nature. A neuroscientist like Dehaene could, if they chose to, take up Nagel's challenge. Dehaene could recreate experiences similar to being a bat and track the brain's processing millisecond by millisecond. But the problem isn't the science. Just as creationist deniers of evolution don't really have a problem with the fossil record, Nagel doesn't really have a problem with evolutionary neuroscience. The problem is the implied devaluing of consciousness. But the theory of evolution doesn't make this implication. It doesn't devalue individual experience and doesn't explain away Nagel's gap between matter and mind. Consider this. Atoms aren't alive, but when they interact within a cell, life occurs. No cell has consciousness, but when 70 trillion cells interact as a human being, consciousness occurs. Just as 12 tones can form a symphony, and 26 letters can form Shakespeare's great works, in evolution, the complex arises from the simple. True, certain camps of ardent neo-Darwinists do argue that consciousness and free will are illusions. But as we'll see in the next blink, those arguments suffer from fundamental problems of evidence and logic. Blink 7 of 8. The brain is a product of evolution, and the possibility of free will comes built in. Like Thomas Nagel, the seminal